BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, today is Wednesday, another Ripper Wednesday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Wednesdays this year I've been talking to you guys about Jack the Ripper, perhaps the world's most famous unsolved mystery, and welcome to part 2 of the double event. Yes, a double event, to use some Whitechapel terminology, 2 episodes for this Wednesday. In this episode, I will be discussing the Jack the Ripper suspect Hyam Hyams, and I have to give a shout out to Baz11, who asked the question, have you ever looked into Hyam Hyams as a suspect? And Baz follows by saying, the only book that I've read about Jack the Ripper is One-Armed Jack by Sarah Bax Horton. And my honest answer is, yes, I used to do a segment here on Black Box Online Radio called the Jack the Ripper Report, which covered multiple Jack the Ripper subjects within a single episode. Now, I've mentioned Hyam Hyams on the channel before, but this is the first ever standalone episodes about Hyam Hyams as a Jack the Ripper suspect. And as previously mentioned, he is the subject of the book One-Armed Jack by Sarah Bax Horton, and I will be citing a lot of her material, as well as, of course, Jack the Ripper Tour, Casebook.org, the Most Notorious podcast. But before I read a book in its entirety, I like to pull up the free sample from Kindle, and I was just revising myself with her material, because Sarah Bax Horton is someone who is a descendant of one of the members of the Metropolitan Police named Harry Garrett, and she was researching her family history, and she learned about this familial connection that she had to somebody who was on the Metropolitan Police at the time of Jack the Ripper, so she began exploring the case, and she made a discovery that in 2013 and 2015, certain medical records were made available to the general public that had been sealed for decades upon decades, and this was done to protect the descendants of people who were related to these individuals. And as she researched the Jack the Ripper case, she landed on a suspect named Hyam Hyams. And she actually stated that there were multiple people named Hyam Hyams, and that she actually had to sort through the different names and actually get the right one. And this is all coming from her sample of One-Armed Jack, mind you. Hyam Hyams was a cigar maker who lived in Whitechapel. He would have been born and raised in England. He would have been 35 years old at the time of the Ripper murders. He would have been 5 feet 7.5 inches tall. And what I think is really interesting about her theory is that she provides an explanation as to why the Ripper murders would have taken place, and that is that Hyam Hyams had epilepsy. And he experienced epileptic seizures, and he was reported to have been violent after the epileptic seizures. And this isn't just some type of speculation or conjecture. She is citing the medical records for all of this. And in 1889, I believe it's September of 1889, he goes into the asylum, goes into Colney Hatch Asylum, and remains there until 1913 when he passes away. So already, I can tell that you guys are thinking about some things. You might be wondering, well, Jack the Ripper operated in 1888. We have the Autumn of Terror, August 31st to November 9th of 1888. I mean, November 9th to September of the next year, that's like 10 months. Well, what exactly happened to him during these 10 months? And the honest answer is, it seemed like he had a lot of run-ins with the law. In addition to being an epileptic, he was an alcoholic and a regular drinker. Hyam Hyams was a cigar maker who would regularly handle a knife. He would have been extremely good with a knife because he's just cutting up tobacco and materials to make cigars. Another thing that Sarah Bax Horton said in the Most Notorious interview was that she expects that having knowledge of anatomical parts and being capable, like having the capabilities of a butcher, would not be that bizarre in Whitechapel in 1888 because people around the household were probably cutting up meat in a lot more intricate ways than they would have been in perhaps the 21st century, because, they're not just going to some place like Walmart or Asda if you're in the UK, and people are doing a lot more things at their homes. They're probably slaughtering their own animals and so on. And she admits that that is somewhat of an educated guess. But as you see, Hyam Hyams is someone who is not extremely well educated. He does not seem to have any type of medical background. And even in the Jack the Ripper Tour article, it even talks about how Hyam Hyams is someone who did not live an extraordinary life. He doesn't seem like someone who would have been very cunning, And could that not be a strike against him as a Jack the Ripper suspect? And Sarah Bax Horton almost quoted that article verbatim in the most notorious interview. I expect that she's read it. And it's talking about how she doesn't believe that Jack the Ripper was that smart. She doesn't believe that Jack the Ripper was very cunning. She thinks that the Ripper was extremely lucky. Just that people weren't walking by at certain times. The Ripper wasn't interrupted when he was committing murders. He wasn't putting on a very large ruse to attract and draw women toward him. He was mostly blindsiding them in what she called blitz attacks. And there are a couple of reasons why he would have done this. One would be that, as I said, he gets violent after the epileptic seizures, but she also speculates and theorizes that he may have had syphilis. That would have caused him to develop a certain type of animosity toward women who were roaming about on the streets. And during the first episode today, I was discussing the story Ripper by Dean B. Cloud. And that was more or less trying to get a window into the mind of Jack the Ripper. And in that episode, it's just kind of postulating that maybe the Ripper was thinking of the women in Whitechapel as just worthless streetwalkers, and he doesn't need to have any regard for their well-being at all. Maybe he wants them off the streets. Maybe there is a type of revenge motive, but a lot of that relates to guesswork. What I think is more interesting to discuss is that what do people have this obsession about Jack the Ripper being some type of well-educated, high-end individual? I mean, so many Jack the Ripper suspects lived working-class professions. I mean, Aaron Kosminski was an out-of-work hairdresser who didn't like to bathe and ate food out of the gutter. Charles Lechmere was some guy who pushed carts of meat. Jacob Levy was a butcher. And you're going to find countless people who had working-class professions that might have been pretty good with a knife, but didn't have some type of extraordinary educational background. Some additional points that have been examined about Hyam Hyams is that he had a very unstable family life. He was married, but he attacked his wife with a knife, and he also attacked his mother with a hatchet, striking her in the head. It sounds extremely painful. But this just goes to show that he had violent tendencies, and he goes into the asylum in 1889, and according to Sarah Bax Horton, during his time in the asylum, he is reported to have been very violent as well, because she compares him to the prime suspect in the Jack the Ripper case, Aaron Kosminski, pointing out that Aaron Kosminski did indeed go into the asylum in 1891, and there should be some time when there is overlap between Hyam Hyams and Aaron Kosminski being in the same asylum in Colney Hatch before Aaron Kosminski was transferred. But Aaron Kosminski was ultimately determined to be less dangerous than Hyam Hyams, according to her research and evaluations. And I mean, the stuff that you get though with Hyam Hyams attacking people in the asylum, if I can be very honest, these sound like some things about some guy who is just kind of thrashing about and brawling and maybe a little bit uncontrollable. I'm not necessarily sure if that's completely in line with the way that Jack the Ripper would have operated, because Jack the Ripper seems like someone who would have been just not exactly more cunning, but maybe just slightly more aware of how to go about things and be successful at it, because I definitely don't think that the Ripper was some type of completely brash maniac. Everything that I see from Jack the Ripper is that someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Now, he might have been dealing with mental deterioration, but he's still aware of his faculties. He's not just flailing about and so on. And I'm not completely sure how Hyam Hyams acted in the asylum. I wasn't there, but that's the impression that I get. Like, this is some guy who just gets into temper tantrums and he's flailing about. And I'm purely admitting that I could be wrong about that. It's just something that comes to mind. Now, another issue, though, is Hyam Hyams was an alcoholic, a very severe alcoholic, and even if he was reported, if he didn't drink, he might get hallucinations. And something that I think is very bizarre about the Ripper case is, again, I think that the Ripper was aware of what he was doing. I have a very hard time accepting that Jack the Ripper would have committed any of the crimes that he did when he was drunk. And this just goes to show that there's somebody who is aware of their mental faculties because they know how to commit the crime and then run down the side street, sneak into the back alley. And this just shows someone who is in control to a certain extent. But I do have to confess that some people respond differently to alcohol. Some people can get drunk and you won't even know that they're drunk. Some people can get drunk and they'll give away the impression that they're intoxicated, but they're still able to act and function normally, or the same way that they would when they are sober, like using a knife, running down the dark alleys. And if he's working with cigars and cutting up tobacco all day with a knife, he probably was pretty good at doing that while he was drunk. But there's something that I think that is more interesting in Sarah Bax-Horton's theory, and that is that Hyam Hyams would have experienced something that is called AWS, alcohol withdrawal syndrome, where because he was such an intense alcoholic that if he stopped drinking, he would even get to the point where he might experience hallucinations. And this is something more that I could see about Jack the Ripper operating in this context, about how and why he is going to commit the crimes, like somebody who would be completely aware of their faculties, dealing with some type of agitation, dealing with the effects of the alcohol wearing off and affecting his body, maybe even having like short hallucinations when he's just being disturbed, extremely frustrated at the women, dealing with the effects of epileptic seizures, which cause him to have violent tendencies, already living a misogynistic life. So he goes after the women, and he does terrible things to their bodies. And an interesting thing about Sarah Bax-Horton's theory is that she doesn't believe that the first crime occurred on August 31st with the murder of Polly Nichols. She believes that the first crime was on August 7th of 1888 with the murder of Martha Tabram. And I mean, every day I get closer and closer to just thinking that that's 100% Jack the Ripper. And you guys who follow the episodes that I do about the Zodiac Killer know that I don't accept any of the unconfirmed Zodiac crimes, but I'm now about 85% that the murder of Martha Tabram was Jack the Ripper, because it just follows that line of escalating violence. Escalating violence that was committed by knife. And I'm talking about the woman who was stabbed 39 times at the beginning of August. But she's definitely murdered in a different way, because what Sarah Bax-Horton is trying to show is that Jack the Ripper was someone who would strangle the women first, then slit their throats, then commit some type of abdominal mutilation, first stabbing them, but then, yes, abdominal mutilations, disemboweling. And this, of course, would not take place with the murder of Liz Stride, but it would take place with the murder of Mary Kelly to a much larger proportion, where she was murdered indoors, and the Ripper just went absolutely berserk and pulled out her organs and cut up her face beyond recognition. But even so, here's a challenge question that I would like to ask you guys in the audience. Do you believe that the murderer of Mary Kelly was drunk when he committed that crime? I think absolutely not. I don't think that that is the activities of a drunk person. For a long time, I've speculated and hypothesized that the murderer of Mary Kelly was high on cocaine, maybe a different drug, but cocaine would be the type of thing where people were not going to be completely incapacitated. They would be fueled with more energy, but still able to focus on the destructive tendencies, as terrible as that is. Now, I'm not sure if Hyam Hyams did cocaine or not, but it is indeed possible. Now, there is another individual that gets worked into the story who's a witness in the Jack the Ripper case, and his name is Joseph Hyam Levy, and he is somebody who is, as I understand, not a relative of Hyam Hyams, but he was another Jewish man who was in the area who may have seen Jack the Ripper, and Sarah Bax-Horton proposes that perhaps this guy did not want to testify against Hyam Hyams because he recognized him as also being Jewish. But there is perhaps something that I should get to, and that is the name of the book is One-Armed Jack, and that is that in February of 1888, Hyam Hyams experienced a very serious arm injury that prevented him from moving his left arm. And I'm not going to lie to you guys, when I first heard that, I was like, what? What do you mean, like, he can't use his left arm? I don't really think that guy would be Jack the Ripper then. That was my immediate first instinct when I heard about that. And what she said, though, is Jack the Ripper didn't start committing crimes till August of 1888. From February to August, the arm injury would have healed, but he would have been dealing with stiffness in the arm, and he would not have been able to bend it and move it 100%, but he still had the capabilities to use his left arm by the time the Autumn of Terror starts, which is actually the Summer of Terror. I really don't know why it's called the Autumn of Terror when it begins in the summer, but I digress from that. Still, though, that is some type of cause for concern, because everything that I'm seeing with Jack the Ripper is that he has strength, he has capabilities, he has use of his body. I mean, he's attacking women and murdering them in the streets, with the exception of Mary Kelly. And this all just goes to show that this is some guy who can overpower people, or at the very least, he can take a knife out and use that in a very controlled way. So, I don't know, I'm a little bit divided about this, even having some limited capabilities of his left arm. But Sarah Bax Horton does point out that a lot of people believe that the Ripper was right-handed, and it seems like somewhat of a myth that the Ripper was left-handed, but you will find this with a lot of other suspect profiles out there. Now, when it comes to the actions of how and why the Ripper would have moved about, what Sarah Bax Horton has done is gone through Hyam Hyams' his medical records and points out that in addition to the stiffness in the arm that's reported, he also had somewhat of an odd walking gait, somewhat of a bow-legged and lumbering gait. And I just was shocked when I saw this, because that's exactly what they say about the Zodiac Killer, at least someone did. The lumbering gait and the shuffling lope and favoring one leg over the other. But I don't mean to get too caught up in the Zodiac world. It's just some things that are going on with serial killers, but this does get incorporated into the psychological profile that was created by John Douglas, and he talks about how he thought that Jack the Ripper had some type of deformity, and I mean, I don't know if an odd walking gait would exactly count as a deformity, or having like a stiff left arm would count as a deformity, but I think that that could factor into John Douglas's psychological profile if he is indeed right about that. And I have 2 episodes that discuss that. One is called Jack the Ripper, Psychological Profile, here on this channel, as well as Jack the Ripper, The Cases That Haunt Us. The Cases That Haunt Us is a book that was written by John Douglas and Mark Olshaker, and there's a section about Jack the Ripper. And if there are any future episodes that you guys would like to have here on Ripper Wednesday, put your ideas in the comment section down below. You can also hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And you can go through some of the links in the description box. One of them is for buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxonlineradio. That allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anyone who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And if you make a donation on buymeacoffee.com, all the funds will be used to purchase true crime books to talk to you guys about. But there is another element of John Douglas's psychological profile that matches up to Hyam Hyams. It's one of the reasons why Sarah Bax Horton zoned in on him, and that is that he believes that the police interviewed the Ripper, and that the police had the Ripper in their sights, and that he escaped. They let him go, or that they maybe missed their man. It's not someone who completely flew under the radar. And somebody like Hyam Hyams was looked into, and that's one of the reasons why Sarah Bax Horton began to suspect him in the first place. But right now, I would like to turn it over to you guys and just know, what do you think about Hyam Hyams as a Jack the Ripper suspect? Is there anything that stands out about him? Do you think that he would have had the capabilities to commit these crimes if he has this odd walking gait and the stiff left arm? Or is this just something that's going to be a little bit too weakened to commit these crimes? Because even if they say that Jack the Ripper had some type of odd walking gait, I don't know how reliable those witness sightings of the Ripper are. And moreover, do you think that someone like Hyam Hyams, who was a cigar maker, would have needed the anatomical knowledge to commit these crimes? Or do you agree with someone like Sarah Bax Horton that he probably was familiar with this because it was normal to slaughter your own animals at the time, or at the very least you'd be more familiar with cutting up things, cutting up different types of meat in the house or something like that, partnered with the fact that he is very good with a knife to begin with? And also, what do you think about just this explanation that he had epileptic seizures that would explain the infrequency in Ripper activities, that he gets violent after he has these epileptic seizures. And that's, again, this is something that she claimed is documented in the medical records that was reported by his wife and his mother, that after he would have a seizure, he would have episodes of increased violence. So what do you think about that? Because I'm going to be very honest with you guys. I thought that was a very strong point. There's a clear and cogent explanation as to how the crimes happened, why the crimes happened, why the infrequency of dates, why is there a crime on October 30th, the double event, and then there isn't another Ripper crime for another 5 weeks. But what do you think about Hyam Hyams going into the asylum 10 months after the final Ripper crime? I'm going to give you guys my honest take on the subject. I was going through one article that was discussing this. I think it was on the Saucy Jackie WordPress, and they used a suspect rating method. And they said that Hyam Hyams deserved a 4 out of 5 in terms of being Jack the Ripper. And that's just their method, like 5 out of 5 is the highest rating. They said 4 out of 5. I don't think he's quite there. I think that Hyam Hyams is an above average suspect. I would give him a 3 out of 5 or a 6 out of 10. I can see lots of strong points. I can see a very clear narrative. If some way, somehow, we were able to just wave our magic wand and learn the identity of Jack the Ripper right now, and you were to tell me that it was Hyam Hyams, I wouldn't doubt you. I mean, like, I would be like, okay, yeah, I can totally get it. But I still have lots of doubts for the reasons that I stated within this episode. So as I said, I give him about a 3 out of 5 or a 6 out of 10 rating. But what's your take on the subject? And anybody can write the show at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is Ned Dahan. There's also a page for Black Box Online Radio. And, of course, BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram, BlackBoxNed88 on TikTok. I use those pages to release shorts and reels Monday through Friday here on Black Box Online Radio. And I will see you guys tomorrow for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, going to you live at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Until next time.